David, I'm Simone Filippini, I'm Dutch, and I have been a diplomat for 25 years, including being an ambassador to North Macedonia, Consul General for the Netherlands in Miami for the southeastern part of the US and Dutch Caribbean. Then I became the director of one of the largest Dutch humanitarian development organizations, Cordaid. After that, I was a year the interim director of the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy. And when being a diplomat in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I have also been responsible for 4 years for the Women's Rights and Gender Department.
When did you start becoming interested in family planning and contraception?
Well, basically that started when I served as a diplomat in the Dutch embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia. When I arrived there, I was made responsible for the family planning program that the Dutch financed for Indonesia. Because the Indonesians had a very rapidly growing population and they wanted to basically to stop the steep growth, and for that they developed a very proactive family planning program. The population was then nearing 200 million. So the prognosis was 200 million, and we all know of course what happened since. Yeah. It grew tremendously. So basically they stopped those efforts, and with as a motto, dua cukup. Laki-laki perempuan and a girl, and 2 is enough. I think the Indonesian population has grown since I was posted there in the beginning of the 90s from about 180, 185 to now 240 million. So that's a steep growth. And that lays a huge burden on the resources that a country like Indonesia has. Well, if I look at the Dutch situation, of course, we now have, in general, we have like on average 2 children. But I am from a family of 8. And so in the 60s, 70s, you see that the Netherlands introduced family planning, especially in the 60s. And the Catholic Church in the end agreed to it because it was presented as a health promotion issue for women. And all of a sudden all women had health issues and all started, with the consent of the church basically, to use family planning methods. Okay, we had a progressive bishop who was willing to think along. So it was about the pill that was a huge issue. And then after 10 years, I think that 70% of all Dutch women already used the pill, because all women wanted to control of their own fertility. And that's a general thing in the world, that women want to control their fertility. And that's one of the politicized issues worldwide. Well, I think that the whole issue has been politicized. It is a political issue because it's about power. Power over people, power over women, power over women's fertility. And if you control women's fertility, you control societies. That's how I look at it. Because you see that despite Beijing platform of action, which is about women's rights, the Cairo conference, which was about sexual and reproductive health and rights issues, you see that there's an unholy alliance, as they're being called, of very conservative, regressive countries, governments, movements, evangelicals, what have you. But if you look at how the situation at the moment is, you see every year there's the Commission on the Status of Women. That's an annual conference in New York, in the UN, to talk about women's issues, and there are formal negotiations between countries. I think this should stop. It should only be every 5 years, because every single year a very strong, proactive, aggressive coalition, which is being called the Unholy Alliance, of very conservative religious groups, countries, what have you, social conservatives, gather there to stop progress on women. Well, what has gone wrong as well is that, for example, under the Bush government and now again under the Trump government, they reinstalled the Mexico City policy, and that's a policy that is used to punish any organization that's contributing to family planning if there would be, even not under their own responsibility, anywhere around them, a case of abortion. even if it's about safe abortion. So that's being used basically to curtail all funding going from the US to organizations in the rest of the world. And that means in practice that many African women, African families or Asian families elsewhere, don't have access to reproductive means, the contraceptives anymore. That's left a huge gap.
Yeah.
And it's not just the financial gap they left, it's the moral leadership
Yeah, of course.
they left behind.
They left, not just the gap they left. Okay, it's not
It's
just
not just the financial gap. It's about
the moral
leadership that they left behind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about political leadership.
Right.
Because you see that women's rights organizations all over the world are struggling and fighting for these rights for women and for a better situation as to family planning and for women to be able to control their fertility. But it's about political leadership that should proactively, in a sustained manner and in a structured way, promote these policies that enable people to make their own choices as to family planning. Well, certainly, I think.
Why doesn't she do it, do you think?
Because it's being politicized. The minute you touch upon those issues, despite all the international agreements that all those leaders signed up to, you get a lot of negative feedback. So it's and they call it constantly sensitive. You know, if you make something sensitive all the time in a discussion, it becomes sensitive. Well, if you discuss it in a more business-like and factual manner, you can really find solutions.
So, do you think the European Court of Justice should influence what happened in Poland, which I think is three steps back?
Yeah.
How do you think we could go about it in trying to stop what's going on in Poland?
Well, I think a central word which I always say to use in this context is accountability. It's about accountability, accountability, accountability. And what I mean with that is accountability to the promises you made, to the commitments you signed up for. And the European human rights rules and regulations are supposed to be implemented in each and any country, and basically they're being undermined.
Do you think do you think we could try and get the Europeans again to talk about it, the European leadership, and how would we go about it to get the political leaders again talking about population globally?
Well, certainly, but also they have to talk about population within the European Union. Because of course you have a few very conservative governments at this moment who curtail the rights of women and basically have entered a road towards regressive policies.
Yeah.
And I think that's totally unacceptable. It's also contrary to the
European law,
to the European laws, but also to the European human rights regulations and the agreements on the freedom of people. So let's start at our own home. And yes, they also should start a worldwide dialogue on the issue, because we come to our planetary boundaries. Well, when I was the head of the gender department in the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we discovered that there was a huge issue as to the availability and distribution of contraceptives for people in especially developing countries. And so we started an initiative, put somebody in Brussels, somebody from outside, we hired somebody to start up and help grow and prosper an organization which has now grown into what's called Family Planning 2020, which has 300 organizations worldwide working on availability and distribution of contraceptives for people who really need it. And, it has grown into a fantastic organization. And